Well, power cuts in winter are going to get a lot worse, it seems. We're currently at stage 6, but we've all been saying words like stage 7 or stage 8, but it's not officially there. Of course, it's going to be disastrous for the country's economy, and never mind all of us going to bed in the dark and waking up in the dark, never mind not being able to work from home or even feed the kids. Now, there's a new electricity minister, of course, let's not forget that. Is suggesting there might be an unprecedented rise in the stages of blackouts. Joined now by the head of the Department of Science and Innovation Energy Secretariat at SANEDI. That's Professor, you'll know the name, Professor Sampson Mamphweli, a regular guest here on the show. Professor, good morning to you. And what do you think? Stage 8, do you think it's going to happen, or even stage 7 this year? Everyone seems to think so. But what's your feeling? Good morning.
Good morning, Gareth, and the viewers. Yeah, when you look at the numbers, it's concerning. We still have very high levels in terms of breakdowns of the coal fleet in the power stations. That's hovering between 17,000 and 19,000 megawatts. And we still have high levels of partial load losses up at about 3,500 megawatts. The demand, we're expecting it to rise to between 34,000 and 38,000 megawatts. So that's quite concerning. And with all that, if nothing changes between now and then, the winter is going to be very, very difficult, like what the Minister of Electricity said. We may reach stage 8 load shedding, and at West, it may reach stage 10 load shedding.
Well, there's a lot of people getting very confused, Prof. Tell me what you think about the various defining of the stages. Some people are saying, well, if we're getting 6 hours of power a day, in other words, rather, let me correct that, 6 hours of load shedding a day, where the power's not on, we're in stage 6. If we're getting 8 hours of load shedding a day, we're actually in stage 8, etc., etc. But that's not quite how this works. How is your understanding of the grading of the various stages? And maybe part of my question as well is, what's the biggest difference between stage 6 and stage 8? I understand it to be the loss of megawatts. Is that correct?
So when we talk about stage 1, for instance, load shedding, it means that Eskom needs to save about 1,000 megawatts. And then for them to do that, they cut that 1,000 megawatts for a particular period or for a specific time. So they could say, okay, we're cutting 1,000 megawatts for 1 hour in a particular area, and then they do the rotation of that cutting of the 1,000 megawatts. So if you look at it generally, if they implement it that way, then when we say stage 6 load shedding, we should have a load shedding for 6 hours a day in a particular area through the rotational system. But what we have seen is that sometimes they announce the 6 load shedding, and then they cut the power for more than 6 hours a day through the rotational system, which is getting a little bit more confusing now. And at some point, there was a time that Eskom implemented what many of us regarded as stage 8 load shedding after announcing stage 6 load shedding, because they then cut the power for 8 hours on a rotational basis, as opposed to cutting the power for 6 hours on a rotational basis. So I think there's a need for Eskom to basically explain if there are any changes to their definition of these various stages. Because what I have noticed as well is that when we were on stage 4 load shedding, electricity was disappearing for up to 6 hours at some point.
And I'm glad you clarified, but there has been a lot of confusion as to whether it's about the megawatts or the number of hours in a day, or is it a combination of both? I still think there needs to be more stages because we're obviously using more and more megawatts than just 6,000 megawatts in a single day. I'd like to ask you this last question, Prof, if you don't mind. How concerned are you? We've mentioned stage 7, we've mentioned stage 8. We probably are going into that in the middle of winter. Do you get a sense we could get a grid collapse? Could it get as bad as that?
At this particular point in time, I don't see a grid collapse. I see higher stages of load shedding. ESCOM can go up to stage 12 load shedding before we can start talking about the total grid collapse. And we should remember that load shedding is implemented basically to protect the integrity of the grid so that we don't have the grid collapse. I've heard that one of the countries, one of our neighboring countries, had the grid collapse last week, and they're busy trying to resuscitate it. If we get to that level, it becomes very dire because life basically comes to a standstill. You won't have fuel in your fuel stations. You won't have, there won't be any internet. This kind of interviews won't happen. You won't have. There will be shortage of food. There will be shortage of medicine, and everything that revolves around life will basically come to a standstill. So I don't think will allow something like that to happen. They will implement higher stages of load shedding while trying to bring back the power stations that would have broken down.
Prof, just very quickly, very briefly, if you can, what neighbouring country was that? Forgive me, I may have missed this, and I'm wondering if maybe viewers are also interested. What neighbouring country had a grid collapse?
It was Botswana.
Any idea what happened?
It's reported that they had huge shortage in terms of generation capacity, and they couldn't get as much electricity as they normally get from the Southern African power pool. You must remember that South Africa is the major contributor of electricity in the Southern African power pool because we are the biggest power market in Africa, in the continent. And with the challenges that we're experiencing, we are unable to provide as much electricity as we used to do through the power pool because we're taking care of ourselves back at home. And now I think based on that, on the fact that we couldn't provide that much through the Southern African power pool, and with their generation shortage on the other side, there was a lapse in terms of managing their grid, and then it collapsed.
Yeah, not good news considering that maybe one day we might be reliant on a neighbouring country to help us with our electricity issues, but it looks like Botswana might be out of the running, at least for the moment. My thanks to Professor Sampson Mamphweli, Head of the Department of Science and Innovation Energy Secretariat at SANEDI.